Emily Carter never thought life would twist in such a strange direction, yet she found herself standing on a cold sidewalk in downtown Vancouver, staring up at a casting studio she never planned to enter, her breath visible in the pale winter air as cars rushed past and strangers hurried to their jobs without noticing the young woman frozen in doubt. The building itself was modern but uninviting, its glass walls reflecting a city that felt too fast and too unforgiving for someone who had barely figured out how to survive a month on her own. Just 3 weeks earlier she was working at a cozy cafe near the waterfront, pouring coffee for tourists and regulars and saving money for her half of the rent. She liked the steady rhythm, the smell of roasted beans, and the tiny sense of purpose it gave her. But when the cafe closed for financial reasons, she was left scrambling for work, calling places, submitting resumes, and getting either silence or polite rejections, until her landlord reminded her that being young didn't excuse unpaid bills, and reality became heavier than her optimism. Her roommate Jenna suggested she search the job boards for anything that pays, even weird stuff, and Emily laughed at the idea at first because she never saw herself as the adventurous kind, but when desperation settled in, she scrolled through postings late at night, her room lit only by her laptop screen, until she found the casting notice simple, vague, promising good pay for auditions for a student-friendly romance project, no experience required. She clicked before her fear could stop her, filled out the brief form, attached the least embarrassing photo she had, and sent it off, assuming she'd never hear from them again. But 2 days later an email arrived with "You're invited to audition" printed in bold letters, along with a studio address, a time slot, and instructions that made it sound far more professional than she expected, and that was when panic mixed with curiosity and survival instincts. Now she stood in front of that studio, clutching her worn coat, telling herself that she could walk away, pretend she never applied, or she could force herself through those glass doors and at least try, because the worst thing that could happen was rejection, and rejection didn't cost rent money, but giving up did. She pushed the door open and the warmth inside surprised her. The waiting room was quiet, bright, and filled with people who looked confident, holding scripts and water bottles, practicing lines as if auditioning was as normal as breathing, while Emily felt like an imposter who had accidentally wandered into the wrong universe. She checked in at the desk, a polite assistant handed her a small number and told her to wait, and she sat down on a leather chair, her heart racing fast enough to drown out the whispers around her. She noticed the other applicants had practiced smiles, polished hair, and clothes that looked curated for the camera, and she wore jeans, boots, and a coat too big for her frame, hardly the picture of glamour. But she reminded herself she wasn't here to become a movie star. She just needed a job that paid enough to buy time to figure out life. She tried not to stare, but her eyes wandered, catching small details, the nervous tapping of a foot, the quiet repetition of romantic lines, the way someone held their script close as if it were a secret diary. She wondered what the project was truly about. The email called it a romance drama but gave no plot, and she expected typical ad work, happy faces drinking soda or posing with products. But this sounded serious, emotional, even artistic, and that thought made her throat tighten. When the casting door opened, the assistant called names one by one. Some people left smiling, others walked out frustrated, some with blank expressions hard to read. Time moved quickly, and soon Emily heard her own name called, "Emily Carter, you're next," and every muscle in her arms and legs stiffened, but she forced herself to stand, smoothing her coat and whispering to herself, just go, don't think." She followed the assistant through a short hallway with framed posters of past productions she didn't recognize, but she admired them anyway because they made the place feel legitimate, and legitimacy meant she hadn't made a mistake by coming here. When the assistant pushed open the studio door, Emily stepped into a spacious room with high ceilings, bright lights, and a table set up for the casting team. She assumed they would be strangers, maybe the director, the casting agent, maybe a camera operator, but she didn't expect her eyes to land on someone familiar. Sitting near the table was Lucas Bennett, a rising actor in his mid-20s with the kind of presence that filled a room even when he wasn't trying. Emily recognized him immediately because her younger sister used to watch his romance films and call him the boy who makes Heartbreak look elegant, and Emily always teased her for it, never imagining she would one day stand before him, scriptless, breathless, and totally unprepared. Lucas offered her a gentle smile, not the flashy celebrity kind but the warm, human kind that made her shoulders drop an inch from their tense posture, and the casting director introduced him casually as if it were nothing special. The director explained that the audition scene involved emotional honesty between two characters who cared for each other but were afraid to admit it, and Emily nodded as if that concept were simple, though inside she wondered how someone inexperienced in romance and acting was supposed to portray longing without looking absurd. She was handed a short script, only a few lines, and the assistant told her to take a moment to read it. The words were tender but clean, describing a quiet confession of feelings between friends who almost became lovers but never crossed that line. And though it wasn't explicit or inappropriate, it felt vulnerable in a way that surprised her. When it was time to begin, Lucas read his lines with soft confidence, and Emily followed, her voice shaky at first but growing steadier as the scene unfolded. He guided the pacing, let pauses linger, and somehow made it easier for her to breathe, as if acting wasn't about pretending but about allowing real emotions to surface. In that short span of minutes, the room seemed to shrink until only their voices mattered, and Emily forgot she was auditioning at all, reacting not to a script but to the sincerity in Lucas's eyes. When the scene ended, the director whispered something to his assistant, who scribbled notes, and Lucas lowered his script and said, "That was honest," in a tone that made Emily's chest tighten, not from attraction but from relief. Someone saw her effort. The director thanked her, told her someone would contact her later, and just like that the audition ended, no dramatic judgment, no awkward critique, just a polite nod and dismissal. Emily walked out of the studio feeling dazed, unsure whether she succeeded or failed, only knowing that nothing about the audition matched what she expected when she applied out of desperation for steady income. She didn't know if she wanted the role or if she was simply thrilled to feel seen for a moment, but as she stepped back onto the cold Vancouver sidewalk, she realized something had changed. She arrived feeling small and powerless, but she left with a spark of curiosity, wondering what would happen if life chose to surprise her again. She stuffed her hands into her coat pockets and headed toward the train station, her mind filled with questions and possibilities, thinking not just about paying rent and surviving the next month, but about why a simple audition felt like the beginning of a chapter she never meant to write for herself. And although fear tugged at her, hope tugged harder. 2 days after the audition, Emily was sitting at her tiny kitchen table, eating toast with strawberry jam and checking job boards again. Trying not to think about the casting because she assumed they already found someone better. When her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, she expected a spam call or another polite rejection, but instead she heard the casting director's voice telling her she got the role, and for a long second she didn't respond because her brain refused to believe such luck, until he repeated the details: rehearsal tomorrow, same studio, report at 9 a.m., and before she had time to ask questions, he ended the call, leaving her staring at her phone as if it had spoken in another language. She told her roommate Jenna, who screamed with excitement and hugged her, jumping around the kitchen as if Emily had won a major award, but Emily didn't know how to celebrate because her mind was racing with doubts. What if she wasn't good enough? What if Lucas regretted supporting the audition? What if she embarrassed herself in front of professionals? Yet under all the nerves there was a quiet spark of pride, the kind she never allowed herself to feel. The next morning, she arrived at the studio early, clutching a small notebook and a water bottle, dressed in simple jeans and a blouse as if trying to blend into the environment, but inside she buzzed with anticipation. The studio looked familiar but somehow different now that she belonged there, even if only temporarily, and when she entered the rehearsal room she found a handful of actors warming up, stretching and whispering lines, while crew members arranged equipment and discussed lighting. She didn't see Lucas at first, and part of her was relieved because the memory of the audition still made her heart twitch with nervous admiration. But moments later he walked in wearing a charcoal sweater and carrying a coffee mug, greeting the director with casual familiarity, and when his eyes found Emily, his expression softened into recognition that made her shoulders unclench. They exchanged polite greetings, nothing dramatic or flirtatious, but something warm lingered between them, something difficult to define, like two people sharing an inside secret they never spoke aloud. The director gathered the actors to explain the story, a romantic drama about two young adults who meet during a difficult season of life and slowly fall for each other, not through grand gestures but through patience, vulnerability, and honest conversation. And Emily listened closely, absorbing every detail, feeling unexpectedly connected to the premise. The director emphasized that the project aimed for emotional sincerity rather than glamour, no explicit scenes or sensational content, just subtle romance built through longing, restraint, and human closeness. And that made Emily's nervousness shift into curiosity, because she understood that kind of love better than the dramatic versions movies often sold. The first rehearsal involved table readings, with everyone seated around a long wooden table, scripts open, pens in hand, reading dialogue aloud, stopping frequently for notes or suggestions. Emily's voice was shaky at first but improved as the scenes progressed, especially when reading with Lucas, who had a talent for making silence feel as meaningful as spoken words. After the table reading, the director moved them to blocking exercises, guiding how characters walked, sat, or occupied space during emotional moments, and Emily followed instructions carefully, surprising herself with how natural she felt once she stopped worrying about looking foolish. Lucas worked with her during short breaks, offering gentle advice without arrogance, telling her to breathe between lines, to let pauses exist instead of rushing them, and to think not of acting but of reacting, as if the scene were a moment in her real life. Emily listened intently because his voice carried both confidence and kindness, two traits that rarely came together, and she felt grateful that he treated her like a partner rather than a beginner. The scenes they practiced were not physical or explicit but emotionally charged, portraying characters who cared for each other but lacked the courage to admit it. And the tension came from what they didn't say rather than what they did. Those kinds of moments required trust, and that trust began forming quickly between Emily and Lucas, not through romance but through professionalism and shared vulnerability. During lunch break, the cast sat together in the studio cafeteria, discussing past jobs and dreams, while Emily mostly listened, learning how unpredictable the entertainment world could be, how one project led nowhere and another changed a career, how rejection was common and temporary gigs were normal. She admired their resilience even though she never imagined herself in their field. Lucas sat across from her, eating quietly, occasionally asking her questions about school, family, and what made her apply for the casting, and she answered honestly. She needed money, she didn't know what she was doing, and she just hoped not to disappoint anyone. And Lucas didn't laugh or judge, he simply nodded as if he understood, saying, "Sometimes we walk into things for the wrong reasons and find the right thing anyway." And she appreciated the way he made life sound less chaotic. After lunch, they filmed rehearsal footage for the director to review later, using a handheld camera and simple lighting. And although nothing was final, the scenes already carried emotional rhythm. Emily felt strange watching herself on the monitor afterward, seeing how her eyes widened when nervous and how her hands fidgeted when unsure. But Lucas told her those mannerisms made the character more believable. And for the first time she considered the possibility that she might actually be good at this. As the day progressed, the atmosphere grew more focused. The director asked for deeper emotional investment, asking Emily and Lucas to rerun a scene where their characters sat on a porch at night, confessing fears about the future. And although the script was fictional, Emily drew from her real uncertainty: rent, jobs, adulthood, responsibility, and it translated into her voice in a way she didn't expect. When the scene ended, the room fell quiet for a moment before the director smiled and said, "That's it, that's the honesty we need," and Emily felt a thrill of accomplishment pulse through her chest. By evening, rehearsals wrapped up, and people gathered their bags and coats, exchanging casual goodbyes. Emily lingered a moment to pack her notebook, trying to process the whirlwind of new experiences, when she sensed someone beside her and turned to see Lucas. He rested his coffee mug on the table and told her she did well for someone new, not as a compliment to flatter her but as a genuine acknowledgement of her work, and something about that sincerity unsettled her in a delicate way, like her heart leaned in closer without permission. She didn't know what to say other than thank you, and Lucas nodded, replying, "Tomorrow will be easier," before walking toward the exit. Emily watched him go, not because of who he was as an actor, but because of the strange ease he carried, as if he knew how to stay calm in a world full of pressure. When she finally left the studio and stepped into the cool evening air, she realized how much had changed in a single day. She had a job, she had a purpose, and she had entered a story she never intended to write. One made not of dramatic declarations or sudden romance, but of small moments that pulled two people toward each other without asking for permission. She boarded the train home, watching the city blur past the window, feeling both exhausted and alive, unsure where this path would lead, but certain she no longer felt powerless in her own life, and that realization alone was enough to keep her hopeful, even if the future remained unwritten. The next morning, Emily woke with a strange mix of excitement and nerves, her stomach fluttering as she got dressed and reviewed her lines, realizing she had been thinking about the scenes with Lucas all night, wondering if she could match the intensity of his calm confidence. And when she arrived at the studio, the air felt charged in a way she hadn't expected, filled with quiet energy as actors arrived and greeted each other, crew members moved equipment, and lights flickered on in preparation for the day. She spotted Lucas across the room, already talking with the director, and when he saw her, he offered a small nod that made her chest tighten, and for a second she questioned why a simple gesture had such power over her mood, but she quickly reminded herself she was here to act, not to think about feelings, even though every line she read with him seemed to pull her closer to emotions she hadn't prepared for. Rehearsals started immediately with scene after scene, each one more intricate than the last, requiring her to portray quiet longing, hesitation, and connection without resorting to exaggerated gestures. And Emily discovered that acting was not about memorizing words but feeling them, letting the nervous excitement in her chest turn into the truth of the moment, which was exhausting but exhilarating at the same time. And Lucas was always there to help, reading lines gently, pausing to let her find rhythm, and offering tips that never felt condescending but encouraging, as if he was guiding her hand through something delicate yet important. The first few takes were shaky, her voice trembling at the wrong moments, her hands stiff, her gaze darting too quickly or too slowly, but the director's calm corrections and Lucas's steady presence made her try again and again, and with each repetition, something shifted. She began to notice the small sparks of connection that existed between two people trying not to reveal their true feelings, and Emily realized that portraying longing was harder than any physical action because it required honesty she wasn't used to giving, honesty that made her heart ache with the character's desires while reminding her of her own. During a short break, Lucas walked over carrying a bottle of water and asked her if she was okay, casually mentioning that she was improving with every take. And although she wanted to reply that she was fine, her voice caught in her throat, and she simply nodded, feeling warmth from the simple acknowledgement, realizing that support could feel heavier and more intimate than she ever imagined, even in a professional setting. After the break, the director decided to combine a few emotionally charged scenes into a longer take, asking Emily and Lucas to act through multiple transitions, moments of hesitation, sudden laughter, quiet reflection, without stopping. And Emily felt panic creep in because continuity demanded concentration and emotional stamina, but once the camera rolled and Lucas started his lines, she let go of fear and allowed herself to react naturally, noticing the way his subtle expressions guided her, how his timing made her responses feel truthful, and she began to feel a connection that was not romantic in an overt sense but undeniable in its presence, a quiet pull that neither of them needed to name for it to exist. Hours passed like minutes, with the crew silently observing, adjusting lighting, checking angles, and murmuring quiet notes, and Emily lost track of time, entirely absorbed in the rhythm of dialogue, the sway of her own emotions, and the inexplicable comfort she felt in Lucas's calm proximity, noticing small details, the way he shifted slightly to listen, how his eyes lingered just long enough, the slight encouragement in his gestures, and feeling a sense of intimacy that came from shared effort and mutual trust, not familiarity or romance. At one point, a particularly emotional scene required Emily's character to voice deep regret and longing for a decision she could not take back, and she found herself drawing on her own experiences of failure, of missing opportunities, of uncertain nights spent worrying about money and her future, and the emotions spilled naturally, her voice catching at moments, her eyes reflecting the vulnerability of someone who longed to be understood, and Lucas met her gaze with such gentleness that it anchored her, made her feel seen, and allowed her to stay in the moment without self-consciousness. The director called cut after multiple takes, praising both of them for capturing subtle layers of emotion, and Emily felt a mix of relief and pride, realizing that she was not only performing but growing into someone capable of expressing what she usually kept hidden, a gift that left her drained but happy. A sensation that surprised her because she hadn't anticipated this level of personal investment in what she thought would be just another temporary job. After lunch, the rehearsals continued, now moving to outdoor sets with soft evening light, and Emily marveled at how ordinary surroundings, benches, streets, rooftops, could feel cinematic with the right timing, the right dialogue, and the careful presence of another person who shared the scene. And she couldn't deny the quiet thrill that came when Lucas's hand accidentally brushed hers during a transitional moment, a fleeting contact that neither lingered on but both noticed, creating a subtle tension she tried to ignore yet couldn't fully dismiss, because it carried emotion without needing words. As the day wore on, more complex sequences demanded they convey longing, restraint, and mutual respect, and Emily discovered that these emotions were not easy to fake. They required listening, breathing, and allowing herself to respond genuinely. And the more she surrendered to the character, the easier it became to trust Lucas, whose calm patience guided her without demanding anything, teaching her that acting could mirror life when honesty was involved. By late afternoon, exhaustion settled in, her muscles sore from standing, gestures repeated, emotions relived, yet she couldn't stop replaying moments of connection, the way Lucas's presence made silence feel alive, how shared smiles broke tension, how subtle acknowledgement of effort made her feel both capable and appreciated, and it dawned on her that this job, while offering money she desperately needed, was offering something unexpected, a glimpse at human closeness and emotional truth she had rarely experienced outside family or close friends. As the rehearsal day ended, the director announced that tomorrow they would begin recording the final takes, emphasizing the importance of maintaining emotional authenticity and trust in the scenes. And Emily felt both excitement and anxiety because she knew the stakes had risen. This wasn't practice anymore, and every reaction, every pause, every glance would matter. As actors began packing up, Lucas approached Emily quietly, offering a soft compliment about her growth, noting that she was stronger and more confident than she gave herself credit for, and Emily felt a flutter in her chest, a mixture of gratitude, nervous energy, and curiosity about the person who could inspire such feelings without even trying, and although she didn't act on it, she couldn't ignore the impact of his presence. On her way out, she paused at the studio door, taking a deep breath and realizing that this experience had changed something fundamental. She no longer felt like someone who simply survived, she felt like someone capable of expression, connection, and possibility, and though the future remained uncertain, the path ahead now included unexpected opportunities, not just for her career but for her understanding of herself and others, and that realization carried a quiet thrill that she carried home. On the cool evening air, imagining what the next day would bring when camera lights shone on her and Lucas, and when the story of longing, restraint, and unspoken emotions would continue to unfold in ways she hadn't anticipated but was ready to face. The final week of filming arrived faster than Emily expected, and the studio felt different now, familiar yet charged with anticipation, as if every wall, every light, and every camera lens had absorbed the energy of the cast and crew over the past weeks, making the space feel alive. She arrived early, carrying her script, her notebook of notes, and a quiet hope that she could continue performing with the same honesty she had discovered in the previous days. And when she stepped into the rehearsal room, she found Lucas already there, adjusting lines with the director, his presence steady and calm as always, and the sight of him made her chest flutter, not in fear or panic, but in the strange, warm way one feels when someone's attention feels safe yet electric at the same time. The director called everyone to gather for a walkthrough of the final scenes, emphasizing the importance of emotional precision and connection, and Emily listened intently, imagining the rooftop scene they had discussed for weeks, the one where two characters finally admitted feelings they had tried to ignore, and she realized that the preparation, the repeated takes, the guidance, and the quiet patience of Lucas had all been building toward this single, defining moment. When they began, the cameras rolled smoothly, capturing each word, each pause, each glance, and Emily noticed how effortless Lucas made the scenes look, how he could project sincerity without exaggeration, and she found herself matching him instinctively, responding with authentic emotion, letting the nervous tension in her chest transform into the vulnerability her character needed, while simultaneously discovering her own capacity to feel deeply without embarrassment or fear. The rooftop set was quiet, the city lights flickering in the distance through the studio's panoramic window, creating a backdrop that was both romantic and intimate without being intrusive, and the director encouraged them to focus on the emotional truth rather than performance, which was exactly what Emily had learned to do, to let feelings guide her reactions rather than worrying about perfection or appearance. As the scene unfolded, the dialogue required subtle admissions of longing, hesitation, and honesty. Emily's character had to confess feelings she had held back for months, and Lucas's character responded with patience, warmth, and understanding. And as they spoke, Emily felt a strange yet comforting connection, a recognition that this moment, though scripted, mirrored the trust and bond they had quietly formed over rehearsals, a bond built not on romance alone but on collaboration, support, and the shared challenge of expressing complex emotions with simplicity and grace. During the key moment when their hands brushed in the script, the gesture felt natural, almost inevitable, and Emily felt a surge of emotion that wasn't fear or embarrassment but a pure reflection of the intimacy of the moment, a connection forged through honesty, vulnerability, and shared experience, and she realized that acting could create a space where emotions were safe to explore, even though she rarely allowed herself to feel in daily life. The cameras moved closer for close-up shots, capturing every glance, every subtle shift in expression, and Emily concentrated on the rhythm of the scene, the ebb and flow of dialogue, and the way silence could speak as loudly as words, noticing how Lucas's presence anchored her, guiding without direction, responding without judgment, and making each take feel alive rather than mechanical. Between takes, the director offered brief notes, praising emotional depth, encouraging small adjustments in tone or posture, but leaving the heart of the performances untouched, and Emily found herself trusting that each correction would enhance, not dilute, the truth she felt, while Lucas quietly shared a smile or subtle nod of encouragement, making the process feel collaborative rather than evaluative. As filming continued, they ran multiple takes of the rooftop confession, adjusting angles, lighting, and minor gestures, and each repetition deepened the authenticity, helping Emily embody her character with confidence and clarity, while Lucas's steady presence reminded her that emotional connection was not a performance but a shared experience, a lesson that made her both grateful and slightly awed at how much she had grown in just a few weeks. By late afternoon, the director called for the final take of the day, the culmination of all rehearsals, where timing, emotion, and subtle gestures had to align perfectly, and Emily's pulse raced not from fear, but from anticipation and excitement, knowing that this single scene would define the story and their character's journey, and she felt a quiet thrill realizing that she was ready, having grown through patience, practice, and trust. When the camera rolled, the scene flowed seamlessly. Emily spoke her lines with gentle strength, conveying the longing, regret, and hope her character felt, while Lucas mirrored her with quiet understanding, his expressions calm yet deeply expressive, and as the final words were spoken, the unspoken emotions hung in the air, powerful yet delicate, leaving everyone on set breathless in quiet awe. The director whispered cut and a few crew members clapped softly, but Emily barely noticed, her attention lingering on the moment itself, on the way Lucas's eyes met hers with sincerity that felt both professional and profoundly human. And for an instant, the boundary between character and reality blurred, revealing a connection that neither needed to name but both acknowledged in small, quiet ways. As they stepped away from the rooftop set, Lucas walked beside her for a moment, speaking gently about how natural and compelling the scene had been, and Emily felt a warmth she hadn't expected, a quiet joy in recognition, a sense that hard work, vulnerability, and trust could create moments of beauty she hadn't imagined possible. Outside the studio, the evening air was cool, carrying the scent of the city, and as the set lights dimmed behind them, Emily realized how much she had learned, not just about acting, but about herself, about trust, connection, and the courage to feel deeply without shame. Lucas paused at the door, looking at her with the same calm, sincere gaze that had guided her through rehearsals, and he asked softly, "You didn't expect any of this, did you?" Emily smiled, a mixture of nervousness and wonder, admitting quietly, "No. I needed the money. I thought this was just a job." Lucas nodded as if he understood more than words could say, and he replied, "Sometimes the best parts of life start that way," and Emily felt the weight of his words settle gently in her chest, carrying both reassurance and a thrilling sense of possibility. They walked together for a few steps in silence, the city lights reflecting on the pavement, and though neither spoke of feelings beyond the script, the space between them carried meaning, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond formed over shared vulnerability, trust, and dedication. Emily realized she was leaving the studio that night not just with the fulfillment of completing her first major role, but with a sense of personal growth, a newfound confidence, and the gentle understanding that some connections, built quietly, carefully, and honestly, could leave marks deeper than any dialogue or scene ever could. As she stepped into the cool night, she looked back once at the studio, the rooftop, and the city beyond, imagining the story she had helped bring to life and the unexpected journey it had taken her on, knowing that while the script ended, the lessons, emotions, and subtle bonds she discovered would continue beyond the cameras, lingering in her heart, leaving her ready to face whatever came next with courage, openness, and the quiet hope that life's surprises, like her unexpected casting, could lead to beauty, connection, and moments that felt like the heart had finally found its rhythm, unspoken yet understood.